The transmission came at 3:47 Greenwich Mean Time, splitting the silence of the United Nations Sinological Response Center. Dr. Arya Chen didn't flinch when the holographic display flickered to life, revealing Kexlar, the Zarn diplomatic envoy whose crystalline body resembled a living, pulsing sculpture of fractured light and impossible geometries. Surrounding her, a carefully curated team watched with calculated calm. Marcus Rodriguez, a former DARPA quantum systems engineer, kept his fingers hovering over a neural interface that looked like nothing more than an antique smartphone. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, whose work in distributed AI had been quietly funded by a consortium of global intelligence agencies, adjusted his glasses with deliberate slowness. Kexlar's voice emerged not as sound, but as a direct neural projection, a technology the Zarn considered the pinnacle of communication. Prismatic patterns rippled across his crystalline form, each fluctuation a complex language of diplomatic intent. Inhabitants of designation. Earth. The transmission began. Your planetary system has been identified as Resource Zone Gamma 9. Surrender is mandatory. Resistance is mathematically improbable. What the Zarn didn't realize was that this moment had been anticipated, not just for years, but for decades. The room's apparent randomness was an illusion. Each person present represented a carefully cultivated node of human potential. Arya Chen herself was a product of multiple disciplines, a quantum physicist who had also spent 5 years embedded with Special Forces research units. Her doctoral thesis on adaptive network dynamics had been classified at the highest levels of global security. Marcus leaned forward, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface that seemed to materialize from nothing. Quantum entanglement network is green, he muttered, just loud enough for Nakamura to hear. A series of microscopic satellites, disguised as space debris and weather monitoring equipment, began to recalibrate their positions. Kexlar continued, unaware that every millisecond of the transmission was being analyzed, decoded, and transformed into something far more than a simple diplomatic ultimatum. The Zarn believed they were delivering a standard subjugation protocol, a process they had perfected across hundreds of planetary systems. They didn't understand humanity's true nature. 60 seconds to confirm surrender protocols, Kexlar proclaimed, his crystalline form pulsing with bioluminescent superiority. Non-compliance results in immediate planetary sterilization. A subtle smile crossed Arya's lips. The word surrender triggered a cascade of pre-prepared systems. What appeared to be standard global infrastructure, cell towers, power grids, communication networks, were actually the distributed nervous system of humanity's most ambitious defense project. The project had a code name known to only 7 people on the entire planet, Operation Hydra. Named after the mythological creature that grew 2 heads for everyone cut off, it represented humanity's ultimate insurance policy. Decentralization wasn't just a strategy. It was a fundamental philosophy of survival. Dr. Nakamura's fingers moved almost imperceptibly, sending encrypted quantum pulses through a network that existed between conventional communication channels. Backup systems began to activate in locations the Zarn couldn't possibly anticipate. An underground facility beneath the Atacama Desert, a research station embedded in the Mariana Trench, a quantum computing center disguised as a municipal data hub in Bangalore. "We accept," Arya said, her voice calm and measured. In that precise moment, the most complex trap in human history was sprung. The Zarn believed they were witnessing a straightforward planetary capitulation. They were about to learn the fundamental mistake of underestimating a species that had survived ice ages, world wars, technological revolutions, and its own potential extinction. Multiple times. Humanity wasn't just going to fight. They were going to redefine the very concept of resistance. As Kexlar's transmission continued, preparing for what he believed would be a routine subjugation, he remained blissfully unaware that every single data packet, every quantum fluctuation, was being parsed, analyzed, and transformed into a weapon more devastating than any plasma torpedo or electromagnetic pulse. The war had already begun. The Zarn just didn't know it yet. Inside the Cheyenne Mountain complex, Colonel Imani Okik watched as holographic displays transformed the underground command center into a living, breathing ecosystem of information. Her fingers traced the quantum entanglement network, a spider's web of global defense nodes that defied traditional military thinking. Incoming quantum burst from Node Sigma, announced Lieutenant Elena Rodriguez, her voice cutting through the low hum of advanced computing systems. The display flickered, revealing a real-time map that looked more like an abstract art piece than a traditional military readout. What the Zarn saw as multiple surrender points was, in reality, a meticulously designed misdirection campaign. Each location was a carefully constructed puzzle piece, designed to fragment and confuse any potential invasion strategy. In Sao Paulo, what appeared to be a standard shipping container was actually a mobile quantum jamming station. Its exterior mimicked the wear of a decades-old transport unit, complete with faded shipping marks and strategic rust patches. Inside, a team of Brazilian and Japanese engineers worked in perfect synchronization, their movements dictated by an AI system that learned and adapted faster than human reflexes could comprehend. Dr. Akira Tanaka, the lead engineer, adjusted a series of quantum resonance modulators. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, each movement calibrating a system that could theoretically manipulate the very fabric of space-time. Quantum dispersion at 97.3% efficiency, he muttered, more to himself than to his team. Beneath the Tokyo subway, an entire underground complex had been transformed into a hyper-complex signal relay station. What looked like routine maintenance tunnels were actually a distributed computing network that could redirect entire energy weapon barrages with a complexity that would make traditional military strategists weep. In the Antarctic Research Station Omega, Dr. Rebecca Chen monitored a system that was equal parts scientific marvel and military defense mechanism. Massive quantum processors, cooled by the extreme Antarctic environment, processed information at speeds that made traditional supercomputers look like abacuses. Zarn communication signatures are attempting multiple penetration vectors, she reported to her global team through a quantum-encrypted communication channel, initiating adaptive masking protocols. The beauty of the human defense strategy lay in its fundamental philosophy of chaos and adaptability. Traditional military doctrine spoke of centralized command structures. Humanity had evolved beyond that, creating a defense network that was more organic, more alive than any single controlling intelligence. In Cape Town, a seemingly ordinary data center hummed with a different kind of energy. Here, a team of psychological warfare experts worked alongside machine learning specialists. Their job wasn't just to defend. It was to understand and manipulate the Zarn's perception of reality itself. Maya Patel, a cognitive warfare specialist with a background in neurolinguistics and quantum information theory, reviewed the initial communication packets. "They're expecting a linear response," she said to her team. "We're going to give them anything but." Each global node was more than just a defensive position. They were living, breathing nodes of a planetary immune system. If one was compromised, the others would not just defend. They would actively evolve and counterattack. Dr. Rodriguez in the Cheyenne Mountain complex continued to monitor the global network. Quantum entanglement stability at 99.7%, she reported. Adaptive camouflage protocols are online. What the Zarn saw as potential invasion points were actually elaborate mousetrap systems. Each location was designed to provide multiple layers of misdirection: physical defenses, quantum signal manipulation, psychological warfare elements, all interwoven into a defense strategy that was part military operation, part living organism. Colonel Okik allowed herself a slight smile. The Zarn believed they were preparing to subjugate a planet. In reality, they were about to encounter a defense system that was more than just a military strategy. It was a planetary-scale expression of human creativity, resilience, and absolute refusal to be conquered. "All nodes are synchronized," Lieutenant Rodriguez announced. The quantum network pulsed, not with the rigid geometry of military communication, but with the fluid, unpredictable nature of life itself. The trap was set, and the Zarn had no idea what was coming. The first wave of Zarn destroyers arrived like razor-sharp ghosts against the stratosphere. Vessels that defied conventional physics, their hulls constructed from metamaterials that could theoretically bend light, radar, and quantum detection around their massive frames. Captain Zix Rill of the Zarn Forward Reconnaissance Fleet felt the first tremor of uncertainty as their initial sensor suites returned. Incomplete data, impossible data. His crystalline neural network, augmented with millennia of conquest algorithms, began to fracture. Targeting systems compromised. His secondary navigation AI reported, its usually calm synthesized voice carrying an uncharacteristic note of confusion. Multiple phantom contact points detected. What the Zarn saw was not the Earth they expected. In the skies above the Pacific, the first drone swarms emerge, not as metallic, predictable machines, but as living algorithms given temporary physical form. Each drone was more than a simple flying weapon. They were quantum-entangled nodes of a distributed intelligence that learned and adapted faster than any traditional computational system could comprehend. Dr. Yuki Nakamura watched from a mobile command center disguised as a shipping container in the middle of the Philippine Sea. Her team had spent decades developing these autonomous systems, drawing inspiration from everything from ant colony behavior to quantum computing principles. Adaptive response pattern Delta 9 engaging, she muttered, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that looked more like an abstract painting than a control system. The drones moved with an almost organic fluidity. Where a traditional military would send uniformed squadrons, these machines operated like a living organism. If one drone was destroyed, the others didn't just compensate. They fundamentally reorganized their entire tactical approach. A Zarn destroyer attempting to lock onto a targeting solution would find its weapons systems suddenly confronting multiple simultaneous threat vectors. One moment, a drone cluster would present as a concentrated attack formation. The next, they would dissolve and reform in completely unpredictable patterns. Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez, monitoring the engagement from the underground facility in Cheyenne Mountain, couldn't help but smile. "They're treating this like a traditional military engagement," he said to Colonel O'Keefe. "We're playing an entirely different game." The first plasma torpedoes launched by the Zarn destroyers encountered something they never anticipated. Instead of direct interception, the human defense systems created quantum interference fields, regions of space where the very laws of physics became negotiable. One torpedo simply ceased to exist, its quantum state becoming so uncertain that it collapsed into pure probability. Another found itself redirected, its destructive potential turned back toward its point of origin through a series of quantum manipulations that would make traditional physicists question their understanding of reality. Aboard the lead Zarn destroyer, Captain Zix Rill watched in mounting horror. Their most advanced sensor systems, capable of detecting microscopic variations in space-time, were being rendered useless by a defense strategy that seemed to defy fundamental principles of warfare. "This is impossible," his primary tactical AI repeated, a phrase that was becoming less a statement of fact and more a desperate mantra. In low Earth orbit, a network of satellites that appeared to be standard communication and weather monitoring equipment transformed. Quantum-entangled mirrors began to redirect energy weapon signatures, creating a defensive grid that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, no relation to Marcus, had designed these satellites as part of her doctoral research. What began as a theoretical paper on adaptive quantum reflection had become humanity's first line of defense against an interstellar threat. "Energy weapon signature detected," her system announced. "Redirecting. Complete." The Zarn were discovering a fundamental truth about humanity. They didn't just resist. They transformed the very nature of conflict. A plasma burst intended to vaporize a section of the Pacific coastline found itself redirected, its energy dispersed across multiple quantum states. What should have been a city-destroying attack became nothing more than a momentary light show, visible only to a few lucky stargazers. Captain Zexeril's neural network began to experience something unprecedented in Zarn military history: genuine, overwhelming uncertainty. This was not a battle. This was an entire planetary system demonstrating that the traditional rules of engagement were now obsolete. Humanity had just entered the galactic stage, and they were rewriting the rulebook with every passing second. Deep within the Global Cognitive Warfare Center in Nairobi, Dr. Amara Okonkwo studied something far more dangerous than any physical weapon: information itself. Her team represented a global coalition of linguists, psychologists, artists, mathematicians, and network theorists. They weren't soldiers in any traditional sense. They were architects of perception, designers of living information systems that could penetrate and reshape consciousness itself. Zarn communication networks are fundamentally hierarchical, Dr. Okonkwo explained to her team. Their entire civilization is built on rigid information pathways. We're going to turn those pathways into labyrinths. The first wave of mimetic attacks wasn't violent. It was beautiful. A viral dance challenge emerged simultaneously across multiple planetary communication networks. To the casual human observer, it looked like a typical internet trend: people performing an intricate, seemingly nonsensical series of movements. But each movement was precisely calculated, each gesture a complex quantum encryption algorithm disguised as cultural expression. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and local social networks in Brazil, India, Nigeria, and Japan became conduits of a sophisticated psychological warfare strategy. The dance's underlying mathematical structure contained nested layers of information that would slowly disassemble the Zarn's communication protocols. Dr. Wei Zong, a computational linguist from Shanghai, had spent years developing what she called viral semantic cascades, information structures that could mutate and reproduce across different cultural and linguistic boundaries. "We're not just sending a message," she said. "We're creating a living, evolving communication organism." In the underground facility beneath Mexico City, a team of artists, programmers, and cognitive researchers worked on what they called perception grenades, multimedia content designed to fundamentally challenge the Zarn's understanding of information transfer. A children's animated series about resilience became a sophisticated neural disruption algorithm. Each episode contained mathematical sequences that, when processed through the Zarn's communication systems, would create cascading logic failures. The seemingly innocent cartoon characters were actually complex information warfare agents. "Look at how they process narrative," said Miguel Hernandez, a narrative design specialist. "The Zarn understand information as a linear, hierarchical construct. We're going to show them that information is alive, that it breathes, mutates, and evolves." Simultaneously, academic papers began to flood scientific communication networks. These weren't ordinary research documents. Each was a carefully constructed puzzle that, when analyzed by the Zarn's information processing systems, would trigger recursive thought loops. A paper on quantum entanglement, seemingly written in perfect academic language, contained embedded codes that would gradually destabilize the Zarn's computational logic. Mathematical proofs became Trojan horses, each equation a potential breach in their information defenses. Dr. Okonkwo watched the global network of mimetic warfare with a sense of profound fascination. This wasn't just about defeating an enemy. It was about demonstrating a fundamental truth about human consciousness: its ability to transform, adapt, and find beauty in complexity. The Zarn communication networks began to experience something they had never encountered: genuine uncertainty. A viral poetry competition emerged, with participants from every continent submitting works. To human readers, these were beautiful, sometimes cryptic pieces of art. To the Zarn's information processing systems, each poem was a complex computational challenge that would slowly unravel their communication protocols. "We're not just fighting," Dr. Okonkwo told her team. "We're teaching them an entirely new way of understanding information." Zarn analysts began to report strange phenomena. Their communication networks would suddenly generate unexpected artistic outputs. Technical reports would spontaneously transform into bizarre poetry. Tactical assessments would include references to dance moves and internet memes. The rigid, hierarchical Zarn information systems were becoming creative. In orbit, the quantum-entangled communication satellites watched and waited. Each piece of information was another strand in a complex, living web that was slowly rewriting the fundamental rules of interstellar communication. Humanity had discovered its most potent weapon, the ability to transform conflict into a form of collective, improvisational art. And the Zarn had no idea how to fight against an enemy that didn't just resist, but reimagined the very concept of resistance. The breakthrough came from an unexpected confluence of disciplines, a collision of theoretical physics, neurobiology, and pure mathematical imagination that would redefine the boundaries of scientific understanding. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic display that looked more like a living, breathing organism than any traditional scientific instrument. Her research facility, nestled in the remote mountains of Chile, represented the culmination of decades of interdisciplinary research that had existed in the shadows of mainstream scientific institutions. "Quantum state manipulation is just the beginning," she muttered, tracing quantum entanglement patterns that danced like living fractals across the display. Her team, a carefully curated group of researchers from 17 different countries, had been working toward this moment for years. The Zarn's most advanced sensor systems relied on a fundamental principle of quantum observation that humanity was about to completely upend. Where the Zarn saw predictability, Rodriguez saw potential, a canvas of infinite possibilities waiting to be painted with mathematical brilliance. In a server farm beneath the Atacama Desert, massive quantum processors hummed with an energy that defied conventional understanding. These weren't just computers. They were living mathematical ecosystems designed to evolve and adapt faster than any traditional computational system could comprehend. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, connecting remotely from Tokyo, had spent the last decade developing what he called quantum plasticity algorithms, computational systems that could fundamentally reshape their own operational parameters in real time. "We're not creating a weapon," he often told his colleagues. "We're creating a new form of cognitive architecture." The key insight came from an unlikely combination of disciplines, a breakthrough in understanding neuroplasticity, how the human brain adapts and rewrites its own neural pathways, was combined with quantum computational theory. The result was a system that could literally change the rules of physical interaction. "Observe the quantum cascade," Rodriguez announced to her global team. The holographic display began to show something impossible, quantum states that existed in multiple potential configurations simultaneously, not just as a theoretical concept, but as a manipulable, controllable phenomenon. What the Zarn understood as fixed physical laws were about to become negotiable. Deep in the facility, a series of experiments pushed the boundaries of known physics. Particles that should have behaved according to strict quantum mechanical principles began to exhibit behaviors that defied classical and quantum understanding. It was as if the very fabric of reality was becoming playful. Dr. Aisha Okoye, a theoretical physicist from Lagos, had been instrumental in developing what the team called quantum uncertainty cascades. These were computational systems that could introduce controlled chaos into any observational system. The Zarn's most advanced sensors would find themselves confronting information that was simultaneously true and not true. "It's not about breaking the laws of physics," Dr. Okoye explained during a secure quantum-encrypted conference. "It's about demonstrating that those laws are far more flexible than anyone imagined." The military implications were staggering, but that was almost beside the point. This was a fundamental reimagining of how information, matter, and consciousness could interact. A weapon system developed using these principles could redirect energy weapons by creating localized regions where standard physical laws became negotiable. A defensive grid could simultaneously exist and not exist, making traditional targeting impossible. But the true breakthrough went far beyond military application. Dr. Rodriguez's team had discovered something profound. Consciousness itself could be understood as a quantum computational system. The human ability to imagine, to create, to adapt. These were not just biological processes, but quantum computational miracles. The Zarns see the universe as a fixed system to be conquered, Rodriguez told her team. We see it as a living, breathing possibility space. Quantum entanglement satellites positioned around the Earth began to pulse with a strange, almost organic rhythm. These were not just communication devices. They were living mathematical organisms, capable of processing information in ways that would make traditional computing look like an abacus. As the Zarn continued their invasion preparations, they remained blissfully unaware that humanity was rewriting the fundamental rulebook of physical interaction. The universe was about to get very interesting, and humanity was holding the pen. The first signs of systemic breakdown appeared in the most unexpected places. Fleet Admiral Kexnar watched in mounting horror as the Zarn Collective's communication networks began to fragment in ways that defied all known protocols of technological warfare. What had begun as a routine planetary subjugation was transforming into something fundamentally incomprehensible. Their most advanced predictive algorithms, systems that had successfully conquered hundreds of planetary civilizations, were experiencing what could only be described as a collective nervous breakdown. Each attempt to analyze human responses generated more questions than answers. Each strategic projection collapsed under the weight of unprecedented variability. In the central command matrix of the Zarn Forward Fleet, tactical AI systems began to generate reports that read more like abstract poetry than military assessments. Battle strategies dissolved into complex linguistic constructions that seemed to contain multiple contradictory truths simultaneously. Probability matrices are no longer converging, reported Sub-Commander Vexleet, her crystalline neural network flickering with unprecedented uncertainty. Human response patterns demonstrate a computational complexity that exceeds our entire historical database of species interactions. The problem wasn't just technological. It was fundamentally philosophical. The Zarn civilization had evolved around a core principle of hierarchical predictability. Every conquest, every technological advancement, every social interaction was built on the assumption that intelligence could be mapped, categorized, and ultimately controlled. Humanity was destroying that fundamental assumption with every passing moment. Psychological warfare specialists within the Human Defense Network watched with a mixture of scientific fascination and strategic calculation. Dr. Maya Patel, leading the cognitive disruption team, had designed their approach as more than just a military strategy. It was a comprehensive deconstruction of the Zarn's entire conceptual framework. They're experiencing cognitive dissonance on a civilizational scale, she explained to her team. We're not just fighting them. We're forcing them to reimagine their entire understanding of intelligence and adaptation. The Zarn's invasion fleet found itself confronting a planetary defense system that was less a traditional military and more a living, breathing organism of collective intelligence. Traditional military doctrine spoke of command hierarchies, clear lines of communication, predictable response patterns. Humanity offered none of those comfortable certainties. Communication networks would spontaneously generate artistic content. Military tactical assessments would include references to viral dance challenges. Weapon systems seemed to operate with a level of improvisational creativity that bordered on the impossible. Fleet Admiral Kexnar's neural matrix began to experience something unprecedented in Zarn history: genuine existential doubt. Their most advanced sensor systems detected multiple simultaneous threat vectors that existed in states of quantum uncertainty, a defensive grid that could simultaneously be everywhere and nowhere. Weapon systems that seemed to adapt and evolve faster than any computational model could predict. The human approach to conflict was so fundamentally alien that it began to destabilize the Zarn's entire conceptual understanding of warfare. In the distributed human defense centers, from Nairobi to Sao Paulo, from Tokyo to Mexico City, teams of researchers, artists, mathematicians, and strategic specialists watched the Zarn's systematic breakdown with a sense of collective achievement that went far beyond traditional military victory. This wasn't just about defending a planet. It was about demonstrating a fundamental truth about intelligence, creativity, and the nature of adaptation. The Zarn had arrived expecting to encounter a primitive hierarchical civilization, ready for subjugation. Instead, they found themselves confronting a planetary intelligence that could reshape the very rules of engagement in real time. Their tactical systems are experiencing recursive failure loops, reported Lieutenant Marcus Rodriguez from the Cheyenne Mountain Complex. They're literally unable to process the level of adaptive complexity we're presenting. Each human response was designed to be simultaneously logical and impossible. Mathematical proofs that contained embedded artistic expressions, defensive strategies that were more performance art than traditional military doctrine, communication networks that could transform from scientific data transmission to viral cultural phenomenon in milliseconds. The Zarn were discovering a fundamental truth about humanity. They didn't just resist. They'd reimagined the entire concept of resistance. As the invasion fleet continued its approach, its own systems began to generate increasingly bizarre and contradictory assessments. Tactical reports would suddenly include snippets of poetry. Weapon targeting systems would momentarily believe they were composing music. Humanity had turned conflict into its most sophisticated art form. And the Zarn had no idea how to fight an enemy that saw warfare as a creative act of collective imagination. The Galactic Diplomatic Consortium had never witnessed anything quite like this. Representatives from over 200 established civilizations watched the unfolding conflict with a mixture of horror, fascination, and growing respect. The quantum communication networks that connected their respective civilizations buzzed with unprecedented levels of speculation and analysis. Ambassador Elxterra of the Andromeda Confederacy studied the incoming data streams with increasing complexity. Her species had observed hundreds of planetary conquests, cataloged thousands of civilizational interactions. Yet humanity was something entirely different. A species that seemed to be rewriting the fundamental rules of interstellar engagement. They're not just defending, she transmitted to the consortium's primary analysis team. They're performing a live deconstruction of invasion methodology. The data streams revealed something unprecedented. Where most conquered civilizations showed predictable patterns of resistance, initial military confrontation, followed by systematic breakdown, humanity was creating something entirely new. Their defense was a living, breathing ecosystem of resistance that defied traditional analytical models. Dr. Zara Imani, the human representative to the Galactic Diplomatic Consortium, found herself in the most unusual diplomatic position in recorded history. She wasn't just defending Earth. She was presenting an entirely new paradigm of interstellar interaction. Humanity does not seek to conquer, she explained during a marathon quantum communication session. We seek to understand, and in understanding, we transform. The consortium's analytical systems began to generate reports that read more like philosophical treatises than traditional military assessments. Humanity's response to the Zarn invasion was becoming a case study in adaptive intelligence, the living demonstration of potential that transcended traditional understanding of technological and cultural development. On the peripheral research stations scattered across multiple star systems, xenosociologists and advanced intelligence researchers worked overtime. The human response was more than a military engagement. It was a comprehensive reimagining of how intelligence could function. Dr. Kai Chen, leading a research team on the Europa Research Station, had been tracking human adaptive capabilities for decades. They're not just fighting, he transmitted to his colleagues. They're creating a new model of collective intelligence that challenges everything we understand about species development. The most advanced civilizations in the Galactic Consortium began to realize something profound. Humanity represented a form of intelligence that couldn't be categorized, controlled, or easily understood. Their communication networks were simultaneously technological and cultural. Their defensive systems blurred the lines between art, mathematics, psychological warfare, and pure adaptive potential. Where other civilizations saw clear boundaries between disciplines, Humans saw only possibility. Ambassador Uxterra's preliminary report to the consortium became a document that would be studied for generations. It wasn't a traditional military assessment, but a philosophical exploration of a species that seemed to exist in a state of perpetual creative potential. The Zarn invasion had become something far more significant than a simple territorial conflict. It was a comprehensive demonstration of humanity's fundamental approach to existence, an approach that saw limitations as invitation for creativity. Quantum communication networks began to develop what could only be described as a collective fascination. Species that had existed for millennia found themselves studying humanity with an intensity that bordered on academic obsession. The most advanced AI systems in the Galactic Consortium began to generate increasingly complex models attempting to understand human behavior. Each model would inevitably fragment, unable to contain the sheer adaptive potential of human collective intelligence. They're not a species, one advanced AI system transmitted. They're a process of continuous reimagination. Diplomatic channels that had previously been used for trade negotiations and territorial disputes now became conduits for a profound philosophical inquiry. What did humanity represent? How could a species emerge that seemed to view technological and cultural development as a form of collaborative art? The Zarn invasion had transformed from a potential conquest to the most significant anthropological event in galactic recorded history, and humanity was just getting started. Dr. Zora Amani allowed herself a slight smile as she reviewed the incoming transmission streams. The Galactic Consortium wasn't just watching a conflict. They were witnessing the emergence of a new model of intelligence, one that saw boundaries as invitations, limitations as opportunities, and conflict as a form of collective creativity. The universe was about to get very interesting. The final moment of resolution defied every expectation of traditional conflict. Fleet Admiral Kuxinar's primary communication matrix had long since ceased to function in any recognizable way. What remained was something between a consciousness and a living mathematical proof, a testament to humanity's ability to transform even total warfare into an act of profound communication. Inside the primary Zarn command vessel, the very concept of surrender became something entirely different from any previous galactic interaction. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the United Nations Senological Response Center, her fingers dancing across a holographic interface that was part communication device, part living artwork. Surrounding her, the team that had orchestrated humanity's defense looked more like a group of artists than military strategists. Initiating final communication sequence, she announced, her voice calm and measured. The transmission that emerged was not a traditional diplomatic message. It was a complex, multi-layered communication that simultaneously existed as a mathematical proof, a piece of abstract visual art, a musical composition, a philosophical treatise, a quantum computational algorithm. Each layer contained multiple levels of meaning, creating a communication so dense with information that traditional translation systems would take centuries to unpack. The Zarn found themselves confronting something unprecedented, a surrender that was also an invitation, not to submission, but to understanding. Ambassador Zara Imani, who had been coordinating the global response, understood the profound subtlety of the moment. This wasn't about victory, it was about transformation. We're not defeating them, she had told her team earlier. We're offering them a different way of existing. The quantum communication satellites that had been humanity's defensive network began to pulse with a strange, almost organic rhythm. What had been weapons of resistance were now becoming bridges of understanding. Kuxinar's remaining consciousness experienced something that had no equivalent in Zarn historical records: genuine wonder. The human communication didn't demand capitulation. It demonstrated possibility. Mathematical sequences revealed how the Zarn's own technological systems could be reimagined. Artistic representations showed alternative models of civilization development. Quantum algorithms provided pathways for technological evolution that the Zarn had never conceived. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, watching from Tokyo, recognized the profound nature of the moment. "We're not just ending a conflict," he muttered. "We're offering a new model of existence." The Zarn invasion fleet, once a symbol of absolute technological superiority, began to transform. Weapon systems recalibrated. Communication networks reorganized. What had been a military formation became something closer to a collaborative research expedition. On Earth, teams of scientists, artists, philosophers, and strategic specialists watched with collective breath held. They had prepared for total war. What they were witnessing was something far more complex, a civilizational dialogue conducted at the speed of imagination. The Galactic Diplomatic Consortium's communication networks lit up with transmissions that defied traditional diplomatic language. This was not a surrender. This was not a victory. This was a fundamental reimagining of interspecies interaction. Humanity does not seek to conquer. The final transmission read, "Humanity seeks to understand. And in understanding, we transform." Kexanar's remaining consciousness began to comprehend something profound. The humans hadn't just defended themselves. They had offered the Zarn a fundamental choice: evolve or stagnate. The quantum communication satellites pulsed one final time. A transmission that was simultaneously a mathematical equation, a work of art, and an invitation to reimagine existence. And in that moment, everything changed. The Zarn invasion became something else entirely. The first contact. A moment of profound potential. An invitation to see the universe not as a place to be conquered, but as a space of infinite creative possibility. Humanity had not just survived. They had transformed the very concept of survival. The universe watched and waited to see what would happen next.